Hello students and welcome to another lesson. Today we are learning about oral narratives. There are categories or classification of oral narrative depending with the features. The following are types of oral narratives or classes of oral narratives. We have myths, legends, etiological, also known as explanatory narratives, trickster narratives, monster narratives. We can first deal with those ones. These narratives have features, and these features are: 1. Timelessness. All narratives have the feature timelessness, meaning the narrative does not have a specific time when it was spoken. Most of this narrative talk about long ago. This long ago can be 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. So narratives are timelessness. Okay. Number 2 is the aspect of fantasy. Narratives takes us from the world of the known to the world of the unknown, the fantasy. So another feature is fantasy. Feature number 3 is opening formula. Most of these narratives start with long ago, okay, and you can give other examples. Opening formula. Number 4 is a closing formula, and they lived happily ever after. And that is the end of my story. So there is a closing formula. And number 5, they have a moral lesson. They teach us a lesson. Any kind of narrative has a lesson. So they teach us a lesson. So I mentioned of 5 features. I'll just highlight them: timelessness, fantasy, opening formula, closing formula, and moral lesson. So we go down to the first narrative that I want us to look at, called a myth or myths. A myth is a story that attempts to explain the origin of a particular phenomenon. It could account for the origins of a community or other natural phenomenon. For example, in the Kalenjin, we have the origin of death. And through that, we can know where Kalenjins derive their death from. So the stories try to explain the origin of death as an important phenomenon. The other one we look at, number 2, is legends narrative. Legends are narratives about memorable historical events and people. These events may include war, famine, migration of people, and so on. In legends, we can look at one legend of the Maasai, which is very common, the Arinkon. Look for that story and read it. It will help you understand more about legends. Okay? The other narrative we shall look at is explanatory narrative, and they are also called etiological narratives. So these narratives attempt to trace the origin of physical or cultural traits. It deals with less serious themes than myths. Myths talk about origin of life, origin of death, but with explanatory, they try to explain the origin of physical features. For example, how the zebra acquired stripes, why the ostrich neck is long. So etiological narratives do not involve gods and the supernatural world. Okay? So there's a story that I love on explanatory narrative, why the cat likes to stay by the fireplace. It is in one of our textbooks. You can go back there and and read it. The other narrative that I want us to look at is the trickster narrative. The trickster narrative. These are narratives that usually feature a character, which can be an animal or a human, that practices deceit on others. Trickster here. I know that has come to your mind. So these stories often than not are aimed at proving that a brain is mightier than brawn. Okay? This is because the weaker character, for instance, the hare, manages to trick a bigger animal. Most of these animals that trick others are small than the ones who are being tricked. So go and look for stories on trickster narrative. The other one is a dilemma narrative. These are stories that show a character or group faced with two or more choices, usually of moral nature, none of which is easier to make than other, and it requires critical judgment and debate among the audience. A good example of this is, let me think of an example of a dilemma narrative. When the hare, for example, let us not use hare, we use a hyena. A hyena has children, and this hyena has a spouse, for example. And then it happens that where they are staying, there is fire. And hyena is told to choose whether to save the spouse or the children. So it requires critical thinking. You've been presented with choices, and both of them you need to think a lot. Who can you save? If you are the hyena, tell me in the comment section who you would save. The other narrative is a monster narrative. So monster narrative are story that feature creatures, fantastic creatures or abnormal creatures. They usually represent evil. So monsters usually camouflage as beautiful women or handsome men and use their physique attractiveness to lure their prey into either marriage or to fall for something. So examples of such is The Girl and Her Mother. Look for monster narratives and read them. They are very interesting. So those are the types of narratives that I would like us to look at today.